A major theme in Pillars is your personal life and ministry. And one of the key areas for your personal life and ministry are the relationships that you have. And you know, the New Testament teaches us through the example of Jesus that every one of us who is called into ministry needs 3 specific relationships. And God uses these 3 relationships in our life to help us to grow and to fulfill our calling together. Jesus is our role model for that. For while he was on this earth, he had these 3 relationships. And these relationships are illustrated for us in Matthew chapter 26, verses 36 through 39. Let me read this passage. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." If you look at this story, you see a pattern that illustrates these 3 relationships. This takes place on the night before Jesus is going to be arrested. He is entering now into when he will die. And he takes his 12 disciples and he takes them up the hill into the garden. And he says to the 12, "Stay here and pray." But then he takes 3 of them, Peter, James, and John, further up the mountain. To them, he says something much different. He says to them a very personal statement where he says, "My soul is full of anguish to the point of death." What he is saying is, guys, this is really hard for me. He doesn't say that to the 12. He only says that to these 3 who we knew were closer to him. But then he leaves those 3 and he goes farther up the mountain where he is now alone with the Father. And with the Father, he says something that he didn't say to the 3 and he didn't say to the 12. To the Father, he says, "If there's any way this doesn't have to happen, but your will be done, not my will." And in this short story, these few verses, you have an illustration of the 3 relationships that Jesus had. He had a relationship in the 12, he had a relationship in the 3, and he had a relationship with the 1. And they illustrate for us the 3 relationships we had. Jesus had a relationship with the 12 whom he served, who he helped. Then he had a relationship with the 3 who he was very transparent with. He shared his heart and was open with them. And then he had a relationship with the 1, someone who had authority over him. He didn't just look for counsel, but he submitted to. These are the 3 relationships everyone who is called into ministry needs to have. There are people that you serve, there are people that you trust and are transparent with, and then there are people that you submit to the authority that they carry over you. Let's look at these 3 relationships so we can understand them and begin this practice in our life. And I want you to do a bit of a self-assessment as we go through these 3. Do you have these 3 relationships? How strong are they? Do they need to be developed? The first relationship is somebody you serve. Somebody, honestly, who is broken. When we are in leadership and ministry, oftentimes we have people who serve us, who join us as a team. And we say we serve them, and we do to some degree. But when Jesus was with the 12, these were the 12 who were really broken. They didn't know what they were doing. They were full of pride, they were full of anger, they were full of confusion. And it illustrates for us that we need people in our world who aren't just there to serve us, but we need a relationship with people who are broken for what Jesus does in us and through us. Think of the disciples for a moment. You had Peter, who was always arguing against Jesus. Every time Jesus had an idea, Peter had a different idea. He seemed to always be fighting against Jesus. That's a kind of relationship that God may want you to have in your life for what it teaches you about grace and wisdom in leading people into truth. Then there's James and John. James and John were brothers who are always wondering about their status and their position. There's even a story when they went to their mother and got their mother to speak to Jesus to elevate their status. These are two brothers who are very insecure if you have to have your mom talk to your boss. And sometimes that relationship of a broken person in our life is somebody who is insecure or very egotistical because of that. But we have a relationship with them for what Jesus will do in and through us for that purpose. In the 12 disciples, you have characteristics that are around us. When we are sometimes in ministry, we are tempted to isolate ourselves from broken people. We create teams that can engage with them, but we protect ourselves because it is hard to have a broken person in your life, somebody who is not at a place of goodness, not at a place of strength. Jesus at times got frustrated with them and said, "How long do I have to put up with your lack of faith?" But there is a great benefit in having that person, that relationship in your life, because it draws you to a closer dependency on Jesus. Jesus made this statement, "Whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me." He's saying, we think we bring Jesus to broken people. They actually bring Jesus to us. You say, well, where do I find this broken person that I'm supposed to be in a relationship with? I don't think you have to search far. They're all around you. Maybe you just have to open your eyes, and a family member or a coworker or somebody in your neighborhood, and you discover, oh, this is a relationship I need, because as difficult and as hard as it is, I'm going to discover more about Jesus through this. Do not avoid people who are hard to work with, but bring them into your life so that you can grow closer to Jesus, and through you, Jesus can grow closer to them. That's the 12 that Jesus has. But then Jesus takes 3 of the 12 and he pulls them farther outside. Now we know through the Gospels that Peter, James, and John were closer to Jesus. There was a more intimacy in their relationship. And it is to these 3 that Jesus is very transparent. Jesus himself, as the Son of God, didn't want to go through this process alone. And oftentimes we find ourselves with the 12, but not with the 3. We hide out. We don't share what's on our heart or deep in our soul. We don't share the struggles we are going through. When was the last time you shared a real and strong temptation in your life with somebody else? Jesus did that. He shared it with the world. When it comes to temptations, we keep those secret because of how it may make us look bad or may ruin our image. And yet this pattern illustrates Jesus needed 3 friends that he could be fully transparent with. You need a relationship with just a few people that you can be fully transparent with. And this is an important part of living out your calling and your life. Now, it's just a few people. It's not the 12. It's the 3 that are there. This can be difficult because being transparent about your shortcomings, being transparent about your hardships, sometimes our pride gets in the way of that. But there's an enormous benefit that can come to that because you were not called to carry the hardships of ministry alone. God does not expect you to do that. So he puts people around us that we can share that with. And when we do, this freedom comes to us. We're no longer holding it deep in our soul alone. But now we're sharing it with a few people, and there's a freedom when something comes out of darkness into light. There's a liberty. There's a joy that can come from that. But you have to be careful. You have to use wisdom in who your 3 people are. Jesus was very clear. I'm not going to share to the 12 what's going on inside of my heart. I'll share it to the 3. And these 3 people you don't just quickly find. Because if you share what's in your heart as a ministry leader to the wrong people, it can devastate them. They may not have the maturity to handle it. They may not have the trust relationship with you. Normally, that relationship you have that is transparent, it's a relationship you grow into. You look at the 12 you have and you go, who in that group could grow to a place of authenticity and deep sharing and transparency. And then just step by step, season by season, trust grows and you find yourself in that place of transparency. Do a self-evaluation. Do you have 3 people who you can sit down with like Jesus did and open your heart and share some of the dark secrets, some of the temptations, share some of the hardships, and know that it is both a safe place and a secure place to be able to do that? Because if you get it confused, it will create so much difficulty and so much hardship, not just for you, but for others. There's the 12, the ones that are broken, the one that Jesus spent his time with and invested his time in, and we need broken people in our life. We cannot isolate ourselves from them. Our ministries can't get so big that we build a wall between broken people and ourselves. We need them in our lives to discover more of Jesus. But then there's the 3 that you are transparent with, that you share your heart with. But the pattern doesn't end there, because Jesus leaves Peter, James, and John, and later he goes and he speaks alone to the Father. And to the Father, there's a whole different conversation that goes on. You see, the Father is somebody that has an authority over the Son. And Jesus reflects this in his words, where he basically asks if there's any other way, but I submit to your will. You need somebody who is broken. You need somebody you can be transparent with, but you need somebody in your life who has authority over you. Now, we all know that God has authority over us, but we're human. So we need people in our life, just a few, who we trust out of their maturity and out of their wisdom and out of their experience, that we actually give them a place of authority. It's not positional authority. It's not just your boss, but it's somebody you trust in such a way that you know that they have the Spirit of God and you're going to listen to what they say so that you can follow correctly what is God's best design for your life. Saul was persecuting Christians, and then he got saved, and God brought Barnabas into Saul's life, who was that voice of authority over Saul, giving him direction early on in his ministry. David sinned with Bathsheba, and he was so blind to it, he wasn't even aware of it, and God brought Nathan into his life as a voice of authority to bring repentance and restoration to David. This relationship of authority, it's not just counsel. Jesus, the Son of God, says to the Father, I submit to your will, not my will. There's actually a position you give somebody in your life that when they speak into it, you honor that authority that God has actually set up. As a pastor, I had a friend who was a great spiritual leader in our church, but he was going to buy a house, and he came to me and he showed me all of his financial situations, and he was wealthy, and he asked me if the house that he wanted to buy, if it was too much, too rich. And I knew in that moment he was giving me spiritual authority over his decision. And if I had said, I think it's too much, he would not have bought the house. And I commended him for not making an important decision on his own, but for knowing that God wants and brings people into our life that we give spiritual authority to. I have a friend who's a pastor, and I have given him that kind of spiritual authority. And one time we were in a meeting with a group of other pastors, and I got frustrated in the meeting, and afterwards he pulled me aside and he said, Joel, I heard you say these kinds of things. And he challenged me on some of the tones and words I used. If anybody else had done that, I don't think I would have taken it as seriously. But because it was my friend who I had given spiritual authority to, when he spoke, his words, they carried a serious weight. And God used those words to help me reflect and to learn and to grow. Do you have a role like that? We all quickly understand having somebody who's broken in our life. We even understand having people who are transparent. But when it comes to submitting to somebody who we give authority to, we're greatly hesitant to do that because we don't want to lose control. And the greatest and most important role they play is not when they agree with us, but when they disagree with us. When their direction contradicts what we think our direction is. And this is incredibly hard because none of us want to lose control over our decision making. But there's an enormous benefit when you have somebody in your life who you submit to their authoritative voice. You see, it's not just their voice you're submitting to. It's God's voice through them. You're not just trusting this individual, but through much prayer and relationship and time, you know that God has brought this individual into your life, and God will speak to you through this individual. God is always our ultimate authority, but we are humanity. And in order to hear His authoritative voice most clearly, we need sometimes that to come through a human person. And Jesus' model says you need somebody who has authority. Where do you find that person? You find them through experience. As you walk through ministry and life, you will have different voices, and you will begin to recognize that there are certain voices who actually do speak on God's behalf for you, and they bring great wisdom and great clarity to you. But you have to be looking for these voices, and eventually you literally have to give them permission. You sit down with them and you say, I need your voice in my life, and I'm giving you permission to play the role of spiritual authority and speak into my life and into my way. And then when that voice is there, you honor God's voice through that person. 3 relationships you must have: the 12, the 3, and the 1. The broken people, the people you can be very transparent with, and the 1 or 2 people who you have put yourself in a place of submission under their spiritual authority. My question for you is, are there any relationships that are lacking? Any relationships that are either non-existent or very minimally existent? My experience has taught me that most of us have people in our world that are broken, but we don't see them in the valuable way of how necessary they are for us. We think we're necessary for them. They're actually necessary for us. We have people sometimes who we can be transparent with, and then sometimes there's a hurt that takes place, there's a betrayal that takes place, so we shut it down and we say, never again will I reveal myself to somebody. Don't let the enemy paralyze you. Begin to trust again, step by step with wisdom, but begin to trust again so you can have a freedom in having a friend you can talk to. Most people who are called into a ministry, the one of the authoritative voice is where we struggle the most. But know that God has His authority over you, and He will find the right people to deliver His directive to you. Build that relationship. Trust God to put the right person in your life. And as you have these 3 relationships, you will discover that you will flourish both in your faith in Jesus and in your ministry, just as Jesus did, because He had these 3 relationships.